This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
What's up, everybody? This is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Press Row, where we talk about the biggest issues in sports with the analysts, experts, and reporters who cover them. No nonsense, hard-hitting interviews on the sports topics you're talking about. A new show comes out every single Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Press Row. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello and welcome to your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. My name is Brice Burge.
I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. Happy New Year, Brice. Year review episode.
Yeah,
we're going to talk about 2018.
Happy New Year to you. Hope you guys all had a Merry Christmas, if that's what you do. Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa is technically still going on, so enjoy all whatever you celebrate. Multiple ones. There won't be a lot of airing of grievances for Festivus on this episode, but it's still going to be a good time because 2018 was a busy year. There was a lot of things that happened in the soccer world, and we're going to try to touch on that here in this opening segment. I think you have to start off with the World Cup. That was a major one for the world, and seeing France eventually defeat the upset special of Croatia. And Ivan, there was just so much in the World Cup this year. How do you summarize it?
I mean, it was. I feel like every time a World Cup comes around, it's fantastic and kind of does take hold of the soccer world and the world in general. For me personally, this year, that Mexico against Germany game will be something that I'll remember for like the rest of my life. That's probably the biggest win in Mexican soccer during my time. So I think that's something I'll take away with, and that's something that's very beautiful and I'll hold close to me. The World Cup in general, the France dominance is something I think that's going to be, I think at the time it's hard to comprehend how good they were. And then I think only over time we're going to realize how dominant they were. And I think they're going to keep dominating for the next couple of years. So seeing them just start off, England was also a good story, Croatia as well. Every time it was fantastic. You had Belgium, and that game against Japan was fantastic. And I guess that was it. But I think in retrospect, just how good France were is my biggest takeaway from the World Cup.
I know one of the things that we talked about France specifically, because we started up this show specifically focusing on the World Cup as a whole. When you looked at France, the big knock on France was wondering whether or not they were going to be emotionally mature enough to handle this. Because when France crashes and burn, they do it in such a way that is worldly spectacular. Like, there's no other country in the world that can flop and watch their dreams go to flames quite like France does with their soccer team. And they showed a lot of people up. There were a lot of French critics that said that this team was too young. There was questions about their leadership in terms of their players, their coaching staff, their national organization and federation. There were lots of doubts about France going into this, and they silenced their critics with good defensive play, opportunistic play up front, because you got to remember that their top scorer that everybody thought was going to do well up there in that top position didn't score a single goal. So that was something that France had to overcome and show that they were a more diverse team, a team that had a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, which came up after the World Cup, that this was a team that definitely relied on its history of colonialism to bring in a lot of players that way. So there was a lot of aspects with France. I would probably flip it on the other side, though, and say that Croatia was a bigger story, especially when you talk about the end of the year awards. When you talk about upsetting England, when England thought that they were going to be destined for the World Cup this year, for the World Cup championship this year, I mean, there were a number of aspects of what Croatia had to do to move along, including getting lucky with their draw. They got the opportunity to avoid Spain thanks to Russia's upset. So there were a lot of things that kind of came along with that I think really kind of celebrated European soccer. But when you looked at it, with the exception of maybe Uruguay and Argentina, there wasn't a lot of other influence from around the world. This was a European knockout stage pretty much. And that to me is a bigger takeaway than just France and the ability that they had to overcome.
Yeah, and you have to add Brazil in there as well. But, yeah, this was a very Eurocentric World Cup.
Brazil was so blah when they got there. I mean, the only thing that people remember about Brazil this year at the World Cup was Neymar's flopping.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Uruguay was probably the best team outside of Europe to make a splash because Argentina was pretty bad this World Cup as well. I mean, their group stage was pretty bad, and they got smoked by France in the knockout game. What was your favorite game of the World Cup?
Oh, man. I don't know. When you look at some of them, like there was a couple of high-scoring games that I liked. There was a couple of defensive matches. I want to say that the question caught me off guard, so I didn't prepare for it.
I know. I put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. Maybe was it Denmark, Switzerland in the opening stage of the knockout round that went to 2-2 penalty kicks?
It was Switzerland. I think no. Might have been.
Was it Switzerland, Belgium?
No, it wasn't Switzerland, Belgium.
It was the game that Switzerland lost in the knockout stage, and it was one that a lot of people just kind of glossed over because it was two smaller European teams, and it lined up really well. It was an exciting game back and forth. Both teams scored early. Both teams scored late. And it was just a really compelling matchup. I thought there was a couple of smaller games that didn't really matter that I thought was kind of entertaining. Saudi Arabia, despite getting smoked out of every game that they had a couple of like knockers there at the end in that group stage, which made it a little bit more entertaining. Because I thought the Morocco-Saudi Arabia game, in terms of just how bad it was entertaining in a lot of ways too, with Mo Salah being so unhappy with his national team, and that discrepancy between him and his professional career outside being named a player of the year, despite how poorly things went for Egypt, I thought was a number of surprising aspects as well. So, I mean, there were a couple of bad games in there that I thought were entertaining because, you know, I like chaos and I hate regimes and dynasties. So to watch some of the other smaller teams play, I thought was fun too. Mexico Germany was fun too. I don't know. There's a lot of games in there that I thought was really, really compelling for different reasons, and so to find a way to discern what my favorite one of them would be is very difficult. I
know. I caught you off guard with that one, but I think you handled it well. Good question. I say it was a good journalistic question by me.
No, I think it was good because you already said what was yours, and that's just because, you know, the big story for me is that this is the first time since I've been alive that the U.S. has not made the World Cup. We had talked about that immensely in the World Cup edition of Your Soccer Passport that kind of kicked off this show. Also with Luis Barranca on talking about this being the first time that he's been alive and Peru making the national the World Cup. Is just a completely different standpoint for a lot of people to deal with and what that's meant. And so maybe we'll use this as an opportunity to take away from the World Cup to other major stories. And that would be kind of the coaching carousel that went around Osorio out at Mexico after the World Cup. Bruce Arena gone, and Klinsmann gone, and Saracen gone. Now, eventually for the U.S. and Greg Berkshire brought in. You've seen a number of other international coaching changes happen. With that international aspect, to you, what were some of the big coaching changes that happened this year?
I mean, I guess the biggest one had to be the one that happened while we were on our little break with Mourinho leaving United. We talked about this kind of earlier in the fall about
from a club standpoint, yeah. I mean, I guess I was going more international, but I mean, Mourinho as well, like willingly leaving, I think is a bigger factor than some of these other guys that were basically told to go or were fired. I mean, that's a completely different aspect. But yeah, I mean, Mourinho finally leaving Man U is such a big story, because I mean, Manchester United has not looked well the last couple of years, and players have been very mixed about whether they've been happy or not in their reports to the press.
Yeah, and earlier in the season, we kind of talked about whether, we kind of talked about Mourinho and Pogba and whether the team or the higher-ups would pick one or the other if they kept butting heads. And Mourinho kind of just took it to a whole nother level by when we talked about that to now. And I mean, that's probably the biggest coaching change, the craziest one, how he has just burnt that bridge at United, the way he kind of burnt it in Chelsea, and the way he burnt it at Real Madrid. In a coaching change, I guess that's probably I guess it's the freshest one because it just happened, and the way he just kept going down, guns blazing, and trying to take down everybody with him is fascinating, and it's just fascinating because now what's the next job he can get? There's only so many big teams in Europe now, and there's only so many bridges he hasn't burnt. So I guess that for me is the biggest one. Osorio leaving Mexico doesn't surprise me. I mean, I'm happy for him that he's in Paraguay. They're going to play in March. I hope the Mexican fans in Santa Clara give him the respect he deserves and when they play each other, because I think he did a lot for the Mexican soccer and he gave us our biggest win. But besides that, I guess Zidane leaving Real Madrid also has to be huge because he left Real Madrid in the highest capacity after winning third straight Champions League. I think that one's the biggest one for me.
You have all of these coaches that are kind of leaving, as I'm furiously typing to get this name up right. You have a lot of these teams that are brought up, but you're not necessarily dealing with the impact that they have, because like you've got club and you've got international. And for me, like seeing the U.S. national team and how they've dealt with different facets of their hiring process, who wasn't interviewed, who was interviewed, is a very large aspect of what to expect from national teams. So when you're dealing with club teams, it's a completely different aspect. I think the best kind of discussion right now is, now with the NFL having their coaching changes, do you go for another pro coordinator? Do you go for a pro coach that's been fired? Or do you just say skip it and go and grab somebody out of the college ranks? And you kind of have that back and forth aspects too. So I think it's very interesting about what these kind of coaches are doing. I mean, you could also add Tata Martinez in there. You can add Guardiola as well, with all the stuff that went down with the Spanish team before the World Cup. There's a number of coaching changes that have really changed the way, or even in Chelsea. I mean, that's another option too. And there's just so many options in terms of what was the big coaching change in the world, debating on whether it's club that's more important or country that's more important.
What's up, everybody? This is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Press Row, where we talk about the biggest issues in sports with the analysts, experts, and reporters who cover them. No nonsense, hard-hitting interviews on the sports topics you're talking about. A new show comes out every single Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Press Row. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Your Soccer Passport is sponsored by Squadcast.fm. A year in review episode for 2018, our first of its type, hopefully first of many more. Brice Burge, Ivan Sanchez Carrasco as well. Ivan, let's change up the thought process here. We've moved on from the World Cup. We've moved on from coaching changes. Let's talk about the League of Nations just a little bit, because we kind of skipped touching on that. But when dealing with international tournaments, I felt that a lot of people took this new Euro League of Nations approach to the international window almost more importantly than they dealt with some of like the U16, U19 tournaments that were happening this year, and kind of made that your biggest international tournament compared to, like, let's say the women's U20s leading up to the Women's World Cup next year. What did you think of this League of Nations approach? Did it work? Is it something that you want to see in the future?
I think it's good for the lower countries because it gives them important games to play instead of just the World Cup or Euro qualifying in which they're going to get smoked. So it's good for those teams. I think for the higher up teams like Germany and France and those type of teams, I don't think they care as much, but I think it's important for the lower league teams because it gives them important games, and it gives them games, meaningful games, and it gives them games, winnable games as well. And it gives them a good chance, a good barometer to see their process and their progress against themselves, I guess. So I think it's good. It's good in that regard. I like that. I like that aspect of it. What do you think?
I think so too, because it does give something important for the lower ones. There's a promotion and relegation aspect that does allow certain teams to move up, but ultimately for me, like when you think about what these small things can do, Europe is a lot more war torn than what people realize, especially for a country like Kosovo that for the first time ever won an international league game. They've never won an international game before. And not only did they win, they won 4 of them to win their group over Azerbaijan and Faroe Islands. And Faroe Islands went out there and did pretty well before they had some injury problems. I mean, Faroe Islands versus Malta, that game, which was held between a team that went 1-2-3 and a team that went 0-3-3 in this group, was heralded as the success of the League of Nations because these small countries could do something. And when you're looking at other Group D or League D nations, you're looking at Macedonia, which went 5-0-1 and won their group over Armenia, Gibraltar, and Liechtenstein. San Marino played 6 games. That meant something for the first time because San Marino has never really done that. I mean, Andorra had a couple of draws. I mean, Kazakhstan got a win. I don't remember Kazakhstan getting a win anytime recently against a European nation. And then you got some other like Balkan nations that are typical basketball countries too, because like you kind of forget about that, is that when you're getting into some of these obscure Eastern European places, the Balkan states of like Lithuania, Georgia, Latvia, their national sport isn't soccer like rest of the European nations. Their main sport is basketball, and that's because they were the ones that really used basketball as a way to fight back in a sports sense against the USSR. And so it's amazing. And if you get a chance to take this opportunity to watch this documentary, you should look up the Other Dream Team to kind of learn more about that aspect. But to circle back to soccer here, I thought you hit the nail on the head. This meant more for the smaller countries, and with the international structure of how international soccer and FIFA is ran. Smaller countries get a bigger impact on voting than most people realize, and it's one of the reasons why it's kind of screwed up. It's kind of like the popular vote versus the electoral college in the United States. You can win 3 electoral college points by going out there and winning all your small states, and then ultimately winning the presidential election. You can kind of do that in soccer too. It's one of the reasons why Blatter was able to stay around and in power as much as he was, because smaller countries were treated with respect in a way that almost it was odd. It was almost like with our Gaddafi in a way, with what he did in North Africa all those years during his regime. So it's amazing the level of play that comes in, and something like this in this tournament that has to exist for the Group C or the League C and League D nations to be happy. And I think that makes it a winner.
Yeah, I agree with you in that regard. I think, and you make an interesting point about the importance of these like small countries and the games they play and the importance of it. So, yeah, I'm with you. It's been great for them. I think instead of like teams like Lithuania and Georgia having to play these games where they know they're going to get smashed against teams like Germany, them playing games against each other, just gives them a good barometer and it's challenging them and it's giving them more game importance. So I think that's good, and that's going to elevate their game, and it'll be interesting to see how this keeps evolving as the seasons go by.
I think it gives an opportunity for a smaller, maybe Mediterranean state or a Balkan state an opportunity to grow to a point where you might see one of them sneak into a League B real quickly. They'll move up, and they'll just get favorable draws and favorable draws and favorable draws, and they'll pop out, and then just all of a sudden they're up there, kind of like a Croatia, kind of like a Poland, where you just like, this team isn't that good, but they've been doing everything that they can to win, and it makes them a darling. It makes them a tournament, a bracket darling that you just want to root for. And I think in an international standpoint, it's important because you start caring a little bit more about those countries where you would never think to learn about them, and to think about like what they've gone through, what their country's importance is in the world. It's a really unique opportunity, I think, to learn about other countries, especially for us in the United States and Latin America, to have a greater global understanding. Let's switch over just to kind of wrap up this opportunity. We've kind of touched on some bigger ones: coaching changes, World Cup, League of Nations. What's a story that we haven't talked about worldwide that I think is one that we should discuss?
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot here.
Well, a little bit. I mean, I told you beforehand that this would be coming. Just kind of an off-ball. I can lead if you want.
Yeah, lead it.
All right, I'm actually going to go to the Chinese Super League, because when you go into some of these lower level ones, you'll hear about a stunt that will happen. Like you heard about in the Australian leagues that Usain Bolt got signed to a team. Like you'll hear about something like that.
Yeah.
But in some of these smaller club leagues, especially the Chinese Super League, you don't necessarily understand the importance of a thing that happened. Shanghai East Asia won this league for the first time in ever. And it was the first time in 5 seasons that Guangzhou Evergrande FC did not win the Chinese Super League. When dealing about how international leagues come up, when you're dealing with Liga MX, when you're dealing with the great decline that the Bundesliga is going in under right now, when you're dealing with the pay-to-play concerns that's happening in the French league, and the improvement of the U.S. Soccer League, MLS. Wow, I can't believe I bonked on that one. But when you're dealing with the MLS and the increasing aspect of these other leagues, it's changing the way that global club soccer is starting to evolve. And it's creating other opportunities. And in China's probably right there. They're buying their way up into the same level that the MLS, Liga MX, maybe even like a French league is, or a Dutch or Greek league for sure. I think that I think the Chinese Super League is better than the Dutch league or the Greek league or the Scandinavian league. So when you have that as a change, when you're breaking up a dynasty in that way, and somebody new is coming in there, your league can learn about what it took to upset the giant at the top. And that's exactly what Shanghai East Asia did, and they did it in dramatic format. They won a game heads up against Guangzhou Evergrande late in the season. It made them ultimately a better team, and they were able to coast to victory, especially for a league that was very high in parity when you had up to 7 teams in the final game of the season trying to avoid relegation. Only 2 teams get relegated out of the Chinese Super League. One of them was definitively set, and you had 8 teams in the standings that could have ultimately been knocked down, but due to the schedule, one of those teams were safe because the things could not have happened, but a team in front of them could have actually dropped down. So it was just an amazing season in the Chinese Super League this year, and really showed that they could be a league that emerges in the upcoming seasons or so to really kind of fight against the U.S., against Mexico, and against, I would even say, the Bundesliga in terms of grabbing talent and bringing them to China.
I mean, yeah, they've already been doing that. They got the big bucks to throw it around. I think, I think they have a ways to go to catch Mexico, just because Liga MX does have so much money, and they're able to kind of control a lot of North and South American soccer with that. But yeah, they're right. I mean, the Chinese Super League, we touched on it a little bit earlier in these episodes about how good the final couple of games were, and they're right there with the money they're investing into the sport to catch to be in that level of the Australian League, the MLS, and I think with time with the time and the investment, that Chinese Super League is going to be very, very interesting because they are able to buy important players, interesting players, and yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I like that. I'm glad you brought that up.
All right, so we got about 3 minutes here before the timer goes up. So for you, what would be your underrated story in the soccer world for 2018?
My most underrated story, I know it got brought up while the MLS Cup was happening, but I think what Atlanta did beforehand, the work they did beforehand to everything they've done to make this club from scratch, pretty much this unique soccer culture, I think is pretty cool. I'd go that. I'm going to go local and go with that.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, what they were able to do with the talent, it was a good mix of the allocation money as well as a good mix of understanding what Atlanta wanted to make that a successful team. They sold out an NFL arena in that championship game to bring a title home to Atlanta, a championship-starved city which has 2 championships in any sport, really. Well, 3 championships, because you got in the last 20 years. One would be the Atlanta Braves in '94, the Georgia Swarm of the National Lacrosse League in 2017, and there was one Georgia Bulldog football championship in the early 2000s. That's all that they've had for championships in the Atlanta area. So, I mean, that's a big one. That is a huge one for understanding what it takes to actually set up a brand new team. And it also shows the difference between the expansion franchises compared to franchises that have been promoted. Atlanta had so much success off the bat. LAFC has had a lot of success off the bat. And you could even throw in a mediocre response because of the playoff bursts that they've had in NYCFC compared to what you've seen out of Minnesota United. And it definitely kind of brings a different viewpoint on what's going to happen with FC Cincinnati now that they've been brought up too. So there's lots of aspects to it, and celebrating what Atlanta did right, I think, is definitely an underrated story across the world in terms of the soccer worldwide news cycle. We'll take a break, and when we return, we will talk about what to expect for the next year. Specifically in 2019, we've got a World Cup, we got a Gold Cup, we've got so many opportunities to talk about international and national soccer. That will be coming up right here next, here on Your Soccer Passport.
This is Rachel Mullins, host of Hashtag No Filter Friday, here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my new show, Hashtag No Filter Friday, where we talk about all of the sexual misconduct allegations swirling around Hollywood. A new show drops every Friday at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Hashtag No Filter Friday. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello and welcome back to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. Your Soccer Passport is sponsored by Squadcast, as podcasters that deal with analysts and guests from around the world. Being able to record remotely is key. Current industry standards rely heavily on internet connection, but Squadcast changes that with a simple browser-based tool that requires no additional software to install. The audio is recorded locally as high-quality WAV files, then uploaded to the host computer, allowing some really good audio quality. To get started with your remote podcasting recording experience, go to squadcast.fm for your 14-day free trial. Yvonne, we talked last segment about what 2018 meant for the soccer world as a whole. Now let's take this opportunity to look in the future for 2019. There's a lot of things that are on the plate for this next upcoming year. Let's start off with the Women's World Cup. It happens every time. The next year after the Men's World Cup, we have the Women's World Cup. The groups have been set. Things are pretty straightforward in terms of opening rounds, but dealing with the Women's World Cup this year, what are some of the major storylines that we should be paying attention to now to ready ourselves for next season?
I think it's going to be the European teams if they can win a World Cup on European soil. I think U.S. kind of have dominated the women's soccer for a while, and then can a team like France, a team like England, one of those guys, can they, not surprise, but can they take down the beast that is U.S. soccer? Because every time U.S. soccer doesn't win, it feels like a surprise or a shock, at least to us in the soccer world who follow it here. So I think that's going to be the biggest story. Can these teams, can one of these teams knock off the U.S. and try to get them to not win back-to-back titles?
And that's a big one, too, because the U.S. women's team has statistically really only lost to one European country, and that's Sweden. Most of their losses recently have come to Australia, and historically, China has actually got the best record against the United States. So when you're looking at some of these teams that are popping up in terms of like Group B, where you have China against Germany, which has shown to be a formidable opponent over the last couple of years since the last World Cup. You also have Spain, and we've talked about Spain in depth on this show about being the next big country in women's soccer because of the extra push that they've had from their youth team, being runners-up in U20 and winning the U16 titles. So it's amazing to see what you could possibly pop out with that setup. I think for me, I'm going to change it up just a little bit because even though you've got that setup, Canada and New Zealand are two countries that we don't know who we thought they were. You know, like it's awkward because Canada is a team that's on the fringe of being of passing off the torch. They are very close to the situation that the U.S. men's team has been the last couple of years, where they're trying to pass off the team from Landon Donovans and Clint Dempsey's and Josie Altidores to not really sure. You've got that situation with losing Christine Sinclair. This is going to be your last World Cup unless something goes horribly wrong to the Canadian national team. And they're right there on that fringe going up against a team that is up and coming from Europe, maybe one of these surprise European teams in the Netherlands. And you've also got New Zealand in that Group E, where New Zealand has always been underneath Australia's shadow. Australia has been such a good women's team over the years, and they've only gotten better with the development of the NWSL and the women's league in Australia off season. It's amazing what they've been able to do. So now that the Aussies have moved out and gone into the Asian bracket and left New Zealand to basically wipe the floor with the Fijis of the world, New Zealand has to show that they belong. And if they can somehow get out of this group, I think it would have a big tilt in terms of understanding what to expect from women's soccer, because it's going to really shock everybody if New Zealand can get out. I think that's one of the bigger stories for this upcoming World Cup.
Yeah, I think you kind of know the head how there. I mean, I don't know if we did it by mistake or on purpose, but I think we're pretty much on Team Spain for the Women's World Cup. It kind of seems the way we've talked about them throughout this show, little by little. It kind of seems like we are, which I'm all for. Like they're going to be my dark horse darling at this point, from the way we talk about them. But yeah, I think that is an interesting aspect. This second layer of teams, when you talk about New Zealand, when you talk about Spain, can they muster up enough to like pull off an upset and make it to a semifinal or a quarterfinal or something like that? I think that's something to watch as well. I like that. I like that. I like that aspect of it, where because you have the higher up teams, you have the USA, you have Japan, you have these layers, the top layer teams. Can one of these next teams that we talk about, like New Zealand, Spain, can they make a push to the next level? And I think that'll be interesting to see.
Absolutely. I mean, when you've got the women's game, it's again kind of like college football. You expect Clemson and Alabama to be there, just like you expect Germany, Brazil, Germany, U.S., and Japan to kind of be there. But now you're at the point where you're not really sure who the next group is, and then you got to debate about that. I think Spain could come up and be that group or that team that really is leading in the future. They could replace Canada in terms of women's soccer, and it's all about momentum, and it's about age and dedication to the youth group. And so it is a unique aspect in that regard, and I'm really kind of excited to see what will happen from that. Let's swap it over now. Let's talk about Gold Cup, because that was going to be the other big one that hits everything. That is for CONCACAF. Everybody that's made the hex is automatically in. So Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, Honduras, U.S., and Trinidad and Tobago, they make it in automatically. Mexico, Costa Rica, and Panama, and Honduras, because Honduras actually finished higher than the U.S. in the hex last time. That is a sore subject. We won't bring it up again. They actually kind of make sure that they are in different pods. So you could actually see the U.S. and Mexico, or the U.S. against Costa Rica in pool play for the first time in an opportunity that we really haven't seen that. So you'll eventually move a couple other teams into this group. It could be Canada with like Davies, who's been really good about growing that program up. Jamaica has constantly been a surprising team. And then you have a number of other teams like El Salvador that may get lucky. When looking at the Gold Cup for 2019, what are some of the storylines that will be coming out of that?
I mean, for me, because I'm selfish, it's Mexico. What technically Tata Martinez has not signed yet for Mexico, so I think that's the person everybody expects Mexico to sign as the head coach. But what are you going to get from them? What kind of players are they going to bring in? I think that's kind of the thing, the style of play he wants to bring in, the players, the combination of bringing up the youth players coming up combined with the veteran players they already have. How much do you use players who've been there before? How much do you start moving them out and phasing them out, bringing in new players? I think USA is going to be an interesting team to watch this Gold Cup as well, because as you said, they didn't make the World Cup last year. So how can they bounce back from that? And how does this team look with all this youth talent they have with the head coach? Finally, after over a year, how does he format this team to go up and play? And can finally a team can a Costa Rica, can in Honduras, finally win a tournament? And it's not just U.S. and Mexico monopoly or duopoly that kind of have taken over this tournament. I guess those are the big storylines out of my head.
There's a lot of aspects of that. I mean, I would agree 100%. I mean, when you're looking at the coaching aspects and an opportunity to see finally where the United States is going to go with their international identity to see if a Pulisic is going to be the guy that does it, or is it going to be a Zardes, who had a lot of success underneath Berhalter in Columbus. There's an opportunity for the U.S. to grow based on that development of players internationally. The question, I think, now is that how does everybody else respond? Because Mexico and U.S. is volatile right now. Things are brand new for them. The window for a team like Costa Rica or even a Panama, because Panama is going to be the first team that really goes up against Berhalter in the heads-up aspect once Berhalter takes over in the international schedule. So to go in there and see what you can do against a team like this is really important. I also think Trinidad and Tobago is also starting to age quickly, and they have not had the youth development to make them a stalwart like they were. Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, they kind of switch back and forth about who's going to be that team, and I really feel like Canada could really upset and swing past both of them because their youth programs in the Caribbean countries are not developing timely enough to kind of catch up with the positives that Canada is moving in their men's game. So I think there's a lot of things about national identity and mostly trends. This is going to be all about trends for these teams. Which ones will break the trends of problems? Which ones will settle down and get into a groove? Which ones will finally show that they can do something right? Because, I mean, Costa Rica and Panama did not have good World Cups, but Costa Rica and Panamanian players individually around the world have done well with their respective teams. I think Portland's a good example. There are a number of players that missed time during the regular season for the World Cup. So, I mean, it's interesting to see how these teams will either rebound or look to move forward, because I don't think there's ever been a Gold Cup in my lifetime where momentum for national identity is pretty much the number one concern for every team available that's already qualified.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect of way of looking at it, and I agree with you in that regard. And let's not forget, also 2019 Copa America in Brazil. Can Brazil finally win an international tournament on home soil? That's the other one. That's the other tournament. That's the other.
No.
No.
I think that's the most obvious out of them all. I mean, Messi is more angry than ever, and I think that with the way that Argentina kind of fluttered. It's been just such an inconsistent product for Argentina coming up this last couple of times. I think for Messi to say flat out, I need to make sure that this happens, and Argentina does well. Also with what Uruguay looks to bring to the table, Uruguay is looking to bring stability with the international allegations and the FIFA investigation that has happened in the Uruguayan national Soccer Federation. Peru's got the same thing. Peru's trying to bounce back. Brazil, I don't think, is in the mental space to actually do anything correct in winning this tournament. It's just not going to happen. I mean, you're going to have Neymar flopping around a bunch, and you're not going to see enough consistent play. Brazil is right up there with the Russian national ice hockey team at this point, where they're just too powerful and too bullheaded as individuals to play together as a team. And I think it's going to be a big problem for Brazil heading into Copa Americas next year.
Blasphemy. Blasphemy. You are taking down Brazil. I mean, it's pretty wide open. I think I will say that. It is pretty wide open. I think you have an Uruguay team that's probably the most consistent, but they're older. You have an Argentine team. And the thing is, too, it's coming off a World Cup where South America was so bad. I think that's the biggest thing, too, about this Copa America. They're coming off a World Cup where the teams just did not show well. And the thing leading up to the World Cup last year was how competitive CONMEBOL was and South America qualifying was, because you had about 7-8 teams all fighting for a spot on the last day. And then, so it'll be interesting to see how all these countries bounce back. You look at Chile, you look at Uruguay, you look at Ecuador, you look at Colombia. How can they, are they making progress the way they should? I think that'll be interesting. But I think because of that and the uncertainty, it is Brazil's to win and to take it. So I'll put my money on Brazil.
Well, since we've now got the fact that I'm blasphemous about South American soccer once again, we can move on to kind of the surprise stories that we expect out of 2019. The obvious ones are off the table. What do you think is going to be a major soccer storyline coming up this next calendar year?
I mean, I think it would be, can Real Madrid win a fourth Champions League? I think it's the Champions League pretty wide open. The major teams like the Bayern Munich, the Barcelonas, the Real Madrids, they've kind of struggled a little bit domestically. So will that show in a European competition and a knockout phase competition? I think that's my biggest story. Can a team like Real Madrid win 4 in a row, which would be incredible, and it would be something we've never seen before, and it would just, I don't know, because they're built for European, for winning European competitions. Can they keep that going without Ronaldo in these like pressure moments? I think that's going to be what I'm looking for in 2019.
For me, I know that we talked about the Women's World Cup, but I think the big surprise story that's going to come out of 2019 is how the rest of the world handles it. When dealing with Sepp Blatter in the past and the sexist comments that he's made towards women, when dealing with the inequality in terms of turf versus grass, pay for play, payments for winners, all this other kind of stuff. And now you've got the English Premier League on the women's side starting to dramatically increase in quality. The ability of some smaller countries that we've never seen before be involved in women's soccer. We're starting to see some scandals even coming out of the African nations with Equatorial Guinea. And we're starting to see some teams that are really starting to grow. And we're starting to see leagues that are starting to grow in the U.S. with the NWSL. How are they going to handle the break when everybody goes to the World Cup in France? How are teams and leagues going to handle that in the relationship between club versus country in the most dramatic and dynamic function that we've ever seen in women's soccer before, especially now that you don't have some of the sexist problems, at least not to the extent that it was underneath Blatter. This is going to be a very interesting year for the development of women's soccer at an international level and see who the have and have-nots are. But the way that the individual clubs interact with that, the marketing, the release, the depth of the teams, the depth of the leagues to make sure that you're not getting like 11-0 blowouts in the EPL. Those are all factors that are going to be coming into how the international scene will react to the Women's World Cup this year. And I don't think it's ever been as dynamic and as uncertain as it will be heading into France this year. So I think that's my kind of like, I want to see how this goes moment of 2019.
Yeah, and the fact that it's in France in general, the way the France kind of as a country is kind of perceived in the world, That's a good answer. I like that. Very interesting. I like that.
Well, I mean, yours too about Real Madrid. I mean, but everybody knows my answer about Dynasty. So, like,
I know, yeah.
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 Give it to Leon.
That's that balance. That's the balance we have, baby. That's our balance.
All right. Do you have any New Year's resolutions?
No, I don't know. I'm kind of the guy who like I try to start every Monday, try to better myself, and then I start every Monday again, try to re-emphasize that. So, no. So New Year's resolution, not really. But guys, just be nice to each other. Let's keep spreading the love to each other. I think that would be my New Year's resolution.
I'm down with that. I mean, it's always tough to be nice sometimes, especially when you've got differences of opinions. But like, I mean, preach the love. I know for my resolution, I've been trying to get into better shape, and then I actually did the math today, and I could actually gain 1,100 calories a day because I have not ate enough to actually deal with the physical reactions to the working out and my job requirements. So my resolution is to eat healthier and a lot more of it. So good luck to anybody else that has the opposite problem of what I do, because that seems to be a lot more of a common situation.
Yeah, you lucky SOB. You got to eat more. Good for you.
I know, right? Well, I've always been underweight, and so that's the thing is, like, we've heard in great detail about your soccer aspects and your soccer skills as a goaltender. I was a runner in college, and in high school I was a sub 5 miler, sub 17 5K, 51 second 400. So like, I mean, I was always a skinny mini to be honest. So it's a different scenario, but it will be interesting to see how this next year comes about. It'll be interesting to see what happens as your soccer passport continues to grow. Last year was our first year, and it wasn't even a complete year. We actually started out with the World Cup last year, and you guys have been very polite to us as we've developed the show between Yvonne and I, especially since we didn't really work that much during the World Cup, besides like the last episode of it. So want to take this opportunity to look back at this last year and say thank you to Public House Media. Thank you to TeePublic, which is our merchandise store. So if you buy anything from that for your soccer passport, then we get money for this. So you should do that. Always good for belated Christmas gifts. Also want to thank Baxter and everybody else that started this up, as well as Matt Pocket, Luis Barranca, the Wolpoffs. Like, we wouldn't have been able to do this without you guys, and I am incredibly grateful for the work that you've put in to help our show really grow. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with that as well. Thank you to everybody as well. Like you said, we couldn't do it without all of those guys, and we talk to them constantly. Luis, everybody, and just it's been awesome. When I started last year, I didn't think this would come about, and it has, and it's fantastic. So I'm eternally grateful. So shout out to all of those guys. Big hugs to all you guys, and big shout out to you, Brice. It's been nice. It's been good. And we got renewed for another year, hopefully. So this is great. Well,
the contracts are out. I signed mine after I pointed out a typo, because that's the kind of person I am. But, so we'll be back for another year. Head into the World Cup. Still don't know what we're doing for the World Cup. Hopefully we'll be able to do something special like we did for World Cup edition, and just really kind of flood the scene with better podcasts, and we'll continue to grow and take your guys' feedback as well. Hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Your Soccer Passport. Look it up and you'll find us. And until next year, LOL, giggity, giggly dad jokes there. I hope everything is well for all of our listeners. I'm Brice Burge.
I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year.